A mail-order bride hid she was a doctor. Until an epidemic crushed the cowboy town, Clara Reynolds stood on the platform of the small train station, the wooden boards creaking beneath her boots. The sun was just rising, casting a golden light over the dusty landscape. She took a deep breath, trying to steady the nervous flutter in her chest. Beyond the station, the town of Dust Creek spread out in a cluster of low buildings, a few horses tied to posts, and the distant outline of ranches against the hills. She had never been west before, and yet here she was, leaving behind the crowded streets and familiar comforts of her life in the east. Clara had written countless letters to Hank Morrison before ever stepping foot in Dust Creek. He was a widowed rancher, sturdy and quiet in his letters, someone who spoke with honesty and simple respect. She had replied under the guise of a simple companion, never revealing the truth of her past, her education, her time spent studying medicine, or the nights she had spent caring for the sick and injured in her city. She feared that if the town or Hank knew the full truth, they would see her as strange or too proud. Here, in the vast openness of the West, she hoped she could start fresh. As she walked from the train platform toward the town, Clara could feel every eye on her. She noticed the men resting on porches, boots dusted from riding, and women hanging laundry or sweeping the front steps. The children paused in their play, staring at the newcomer. Clara smiled politely at each person she passed, keeping her head high, her posture steady, even though her heart pounded with uncertainty. The wind carried the scent of dry earth and horses, the smell of a world very different from the one she had left. Hank Morrison came out from behind the general store just as Clara reached the main street. He was taller than she expected, with broad shoulders and hands roughened from years of work on the ranch. His hair was dark, peppered with gray, and his eyes held a quiet strength, though there was a softness there too, a kindness she had glimpsed in their letters. He tipped his hat and offered a small, careful smile. "Miss Reynolds?" he asked, his voice low and steady. Clara nodded. "Yes, I'm Clara," she said, her voice soft but confident. She tried not to show how tense she felt. Hank gave a small nod and held out his hand. "Welcome to Dust Creek." The town felt smaller than she had imagined. A few buildings lined the main street, a general store, a blacksmith, a saloon with swinging doors, and a small church at the far end. Beyond that, the town seemed to melt into rolling hills and wide open spaces. Clara had read about the frontier towns, but standing here she understood the isolation. Life here was different, slower, harsher, yet somehow free. Hank guided her to a modest house on the edge of town, one that had been empty since his late wife had passed. It was simple but sturdy, with wooden walls and a small porch that overlooked the fields. Clara noted the garden at the side, the well in the yard, and the barn in the distance. Everything smelled of wood, earth, and the faint trace of animals. She felt a mixture of excitement and apprehension. This would be her home now, at least for the foreseeable future. "I hope you find it comfortable," Hank said, breaking the silence as they entered. "I know it's not much, but it'll keep you safe and fed." Clara smiled politely. "It's perfect," she said. In truth, it was nothing like her old life, but it had a charm, a sense of stability that she had been longing for. She set her small trunk down and looked around the room, imagining how she could make it her own. Days passed, and Clara began to settle into the rhythm of Dust Creek. She rose early each morning, helping Hank with small chores around the house and learning the patterns of the town. She went to the general store, greeted the shopkeepers, and gradually introduced herself to the other women. They were curious, some wary, but all polite. Clara found herself observing quietly, noting the way the town functioned, the way people relied on one another, the subtle codes of respect, the unspoken rules that kept a small community together. Despite her efforts to blend in, Clara could not hide her intellect entirely. She had a mind that noticed details others overlooked. She read the illnesses and aches of the townspeople with a careful eye, suggesting remedies that were simple but effective. When Mrs. Parker complained of a persistent cough, Clara recommended a tea made from herbs she had studied, and the woman was amazed at the relief it brought. Still, Clara downplayed her knowledge, laughing it off as common sense or an old family trick. She was careful not to reveal too much, wanting to be seen as a gentle, capable companion rather than a medical professional. Hank watched her quietly, often from the doorway or while she worked in the kitchen. There was a sense of admiration in his eyes, though he did not yet know how deeply Clara's past and skills ran. He appreciated her patience with the children in town, her careful attention to animals, and her calmness in moments of minor crises. Dust Creek, he realized, was not used to women who could think so clearly, act so decisively, and yet remain humble and kind. Clara, meanwhile, wrestled with her own feelings. She wanted to reveal herself, to use her skills to help the town more fully, but she feared rejection. She had learned, through years of study and work in the city, that people sometimes reacted poorly to women in positions of knowledge or authority. Here, in this small frontier town, she could only guess how they would respond. So she kept her secret, tucked it behind polite smiles and quiet acts of kindness, waiting for a moment when she might need to reveal the truth. Life in Dust Creek was not without challenges. The weather was unpredictable, bringing both blistering heat and sudden storms. Clara learned to carry water from the well, tend to the small garden, and assist Hank with the animals when needed. The work was hard, the days long, but it was honest labor, and she found satisfaction in the routine. She began to enjoy the simple pleasures of the town, the sound of the wind through the hills, the laughter of children playing, and the quiet evenings watching the sun set over the prairie. She also began to form bonds with the townspeople. The women shared their stories with her, tales of love, loss, and the hardships of frontier life. The men offered small tokens of respect, sometimes a nod, sometimes a piece of advice or help with a particularly difficult task. Clara listened, shared when appropriate, and slowly became part of the fabric of Dust Creek. She was no longer just a stranger. She was someone who could be relied upon, someone who brought a calm presence to a town that had seen both joy and sorrow. Evenings were often quiet. Clara would sit on the porch with Hank, talking about the world beyond Dust Creek, about books she had read, about the lives she had left behind. Hank listened more than he spoke, but there was a warmth in his gaze, a quiet respect for the woman who had entered his life so unexpectedly. Clara felt a flicker of something she had not felt in a long time, a sense of home, of belonging, of being seen for who she was, even if the full truth remained hidden. Yet, Clara knew her secret was a fragile thing. Every time she helped a sick child, every time she offered advice that saved a minor injury, she skirted the edge of exposure. She feared the day when someone might question her too closely, when her carefully constructed image as a humble bride might crumble. And yet she also felt a stirring of hope, a hope that when the time came, she could step forward and show Dust Creek not just the woman they saw, but the healer she truly was. In these first weeks, Clara learned the rhythm of the town, the patterns of the people, and the quiet strength it took to survive on the frontier. She saw resilience in every face, courage in every action, and a deep sense of community that bound Dust Creek together. And though she had arrived as a stranger with a carefully hidden past and a secret skill, she began to feel that perhaps this place, with its hardships and simple beauty, could be the place where she truly belonged. As the sun set over the hills one evening, Clara stood on the porch, watching the sky turn shades of pink and orange. She felt the wind in her hair, the dust under her boots, and the strange, comforting sense that her journey had only just begun. Dust Creek was a place of new beginnings, a place where courage, kindness, and hidden strength could flourish. And Clara, the mail-order bride with a secret, was ready to find her place in its story. Clara Reynolds had begun to settle fully into the rhythm of Dust Creek. The days were long and the work was hard, but the simplicity of the life here brought her a quiet satisfaction she had never known in the city. Every morning she woke with the sun, the golden light spilling across the hills and warming the wooden floors of the small house she shared with Hank Morrison. She had grown familiar with the creak of the floorboards, the scent of the garden herbs, and the low hum of the town as it came to life. Hank, too, had settled into a steady routine with her. Their mornings were often spent tending to the animals, feeding the chickens, checking on the horses, and walking the fences to make sure nothing had been damaged overnight. Clara watched Hank work with quiet admiration. He had a strength that came from years of labor, but there was also a patience, a careful thoughtfulness in the way he handled the animals and the land. She felt a growing respect for him, one that went beyond the polite affection of a new bride. Though she tried to appear as a gentle, simple companion, Clara's mind could not ignore the struggles of Dust Creek. The town had no doctor, no proper medical care, and many of the townspeople relied on old remedies or guesswork when illness struck. Clara often found herself quietly observing, noticing fevers, rashes, or coughs among the children and older folks. She helped when she could, making soothing teas, cleaning wounds, and offering advice on rest and nutrition. But she continued to downplay her knowledge. It was safer this way, she told herself, until the right moment arrived. In the afternoons, Clara would often wander into town. She visited the general store, helping Mrs. Parker arrange goods on the shelves, or chatting with the women who gathered outside the saloon to exchange news. Some were curious about her past, asking gentle questions about her life in the East, the kind of questions that could have led to suspicion. Clara answered lightly, keeping her stories vague. She spoke of simple hobbies, books she enjoyed, or distant family, but never of her medical studies or her years working with the sick. Yet the townspeople sensed her intelligence, the way she thought before she spoke, the careful observations she made of the world around her. Children were especially drawn to her. They followed her in the garden, asking endless questions about plants, animals, and the little tricks she used to keep the house running smoothly. Clara enjoyed their curiosity, teaching them small lessons about the world and gently guiding them when they got into trouble. Hank watched from the porch, a small smile tugging at his lips. He could see the effect she had on the children and the town. Clara had a presence that drew people in, even when she was trying to remain unnoticed. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills and painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, Clara sat on the porch with Hank. They had been quietly watching the horizon, the wind carrying the smell of dry grass and horses. "You seem to know a lot about the world," Hank said, breaking the silence. "You've helped a few people in town already. The kids, Mrs. Parker, old Mr. Jenkins, you have a way with them." Clara smiled, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. "I just try to pay attention," she said softly. "Sometimes people need a little guidance, nothing more." She kept her voice calm, careful not to reveal more than she intended. Hank nodded, his eyes thoughtful. "It's more than guidance. You think ahead, you notice things others don't. It's impressive." Clara felt a flicker of guilt and longing. She wanted to tell him the truth, that she had trained in medicine, that she had spent years learning how to heal, but fear held her back. What if he thought she was arrogant? Or worse, what if the townspeople rejected her? She shook her head slightly, forcing the thoughts away. For now, she would keep her secret. Days turned into weeks, and Clara's bond with Dust Creek grew stronger. She learned the stories of its people, the joys and sorrows they carried, the struggles they faced with the land, the animals, and the unpredictable weather. She listened with empathy, offering comfort and practical advice whenever she could. The townspeople began to rely on her without fully realizing why. Her calm demeanor, her careful thought, and her gentle guidance became a steadying force in the town. Hank noticed the change too. He had grown accustomed to her presence in ways he could not fully explain. She brought a quiet order to his chaotic life, a calmness that steadied him when the ranch work grew exhausting. He found himself looking forward to their conversations in the evenings, to the small routines of daily life with her by his side. There was a growing trust between them, one that had started with polite respect and now teetered on the edge of something deeper. One afternoon, Clara walked through the town and found herself in front of the small schoolhouse. A few children were inside, learning their letters while others played outside. Clara watched them for a moment, remembering her own childhood, the dreams she had once held. She knelt to speak with little Anna, a shy girl with a cough that had lingered for days. "Have you been resting enough?" Clara asked gently. Anna nodded, but her face was pale and she clutched a small cloth to her chest. Clara reached into her satchel and pulled out a small bundle of herbs she had prepared. "Drink this tea. It will help you feel better," she said, handing it to the girl. Anna looked up with wide eyes, unsure, then nodded and ran inside to her mother. Clara stood and continued walking, the weight of responsibility pressing on her heart. She wanted to do more to heal, to save, but she had to be careful. The town was not ready for the full truth. She would wait, she would watch, and she would prepare for the moment when her skills would be needed most. Evenings were her favorite part of the day. The work of the ranch was done, the children were asleep, and the town settled into a quiet lull. Clara and Hank often sat together on the porch, sharing stories, thoughts, and occasional laughter. They spoke of simple things, books, memories, the beauty of the land. But Clara also felt the subtle pull of deeper emotions. She saw kindness in Hank's eyes, patience, and a growing admiration that she could not ignore. She found herself opening up in ways she had not anticipated, though always keeping the most personal parts of her life carefully hidden. The seasons began to change. The harsh summer heat gave way to cooler evenings, and the winds brought the scent of approaching rain. Clara helped Hank prepare for the seasonal changes, securing the barn, storing extra feed, and teaching the children how to help. Life in Dust Creek was never easy, but Clara felt a sense of accomplishment in her efforts. She was not just surviving, she was contributing, shaping the world around her in small but meaningful ways. One day, a traveling trader came into town. He was a tall man with a leather coat and a heavy pack, carrying news and goods from towns further west. Clara listened carefully as he spoke, noting the diseases and illnesses he mentioned, the warnings he gave about a sickness spreading in distant settlements. A chill ran down her spine. She knew that Dust Creek, isolated though it was, could not remain untouched forever. Her secret suddenly felt heavier, the knowledge she carried more urgent. She spent that night in quiet thought, the wind rustling the curtains and the distant howl of coyotes reaching her ears. If a disease reached Dust Creek, could the town survive without proper care? Could she continue to hide who she truly was, or would she have to step forward sooner than she had planned? Clara felt a mix of fear and determination. She had promised herself she would protect this town, even if it meant revealing her secret. The thought both frightened and strengthened her. As the days went by, Clara found herself increasingly engaged with the health of the town. She observed minor injuries and illnesses with careful attention, offering guidance and remedies where she could. Mrs. Parker's persistent cough improved under her care, and old Mr. Jenkins no longer complained of chest pains that could be soothed with simple exercises and herbal tea. The townspeople began to speak of her quietly, noticing her wisdom, her careful thought, and her gentle guidance, though they could not put their finger on why she seemed so capable. Hank noticed the change too. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, he reached for Clara's hand. It was a small gesture, but it carried weight. "You've changed this town," he said softly. "You've made things better for everyone here. I don't know how, but I see it." Clara felt a warmth spread through her chest. She squeezed his hand gently, a mixture of gratitude and fear swirling inside her. One day soon she would have to reveal her full truth, but for now she would continue to guide, to teach, and to protect in subtle ways. The bond she was forming with Hank, and the trust she was earning from the town, gave her hope that Dust Creek could weather whatever challenges were coming. By the end of autumn, Clara had become an integral part of Dust Creek. She was no longer just the new bride, the outsider. She was a presence the town depended upon. Children sought her guidance, adults asked her advice, and even Hank relied on her judgment in matters both small and large. Her secret still remained hidden, but the seeds of trust and respect had been planted. And in the quiet moments, as Clara watched the sun dip behind the hills or listened to the wind through the trees, she felt a stirring of hope. The town was fragile, the future uncertain, but she was ready. When the time came, she would step forward, reveal her true self, and do everything in her power to protect the people who had come to rely on her. Dust Creek had welcomed her, and now she was preparing to return that trust in ways that would test her courage, her wisdom, and her heart. The first sign of trouble came quietly, almost unnoticed. Clara had been tending to her small garden early one morning when she saw young Tommy Jenkins, the boy she had watched grow up since her arrival, stumble toward her. His face was flushed, and sweat dotted his forehead. He coughed harshly, clutching his chest, and his small body trembled. Clara's heart clenched. She gently guided him to the shade of the barn and checked his pulse. It was rapid and irregular. "Tommy, what's wrong?" she asked softly, her hands cool against his fevered skin. "I don't feel well, Miss Clara," he mumbled. "My head, it hurts, and my stomach, it hurts too." Clara's mind raced. Fever, fatigue, nausea, these were all early signs. She had seen similar symptoms in distant towns in her years of study and practice. Dust Creek had no doctor, no medicine beyond simple remedies, and she knew the town would be vulnerable if this illness spread. Yet she hesitated for a moment, as she had so often before. Could she step forward fully? Could she reveal the truth she had hidden for so long? There was no time for doubt. Clara knelt beside Tommy and began her assessment quietly. She gave him cool water, applied damp cloths to his forehead, and instructed his mother on careful feeding. She could see the worry in the woman's eyes, the fear that had no name. Clara whispered words of reassurance, promising she would do everything she could. By the next day, more children fell ill. First it was Tommy's sister, then a neighbor boy, and soon, whispers of fever and chills spread throughout Dust Creek. Clara worked tirelessly, moving from house to house, advising the townspeople, administering basic care, and quietly observing patterns in the sickness. It was more than a simple fever. It was contagious, aggressive, and spreading fast. Panic began to take root in the town, though many tried to hide it behind stoic faces. Hank noticed Clara's quiet intensity. He had seen her care for the townspeople, but now it was different. There was urgency in her movements, a determination he could not ignore. "Clara," he said one evening, helping her carry a basket of herbs and bandages, "you're doing more than anyone here can understand. Maybe it's time you tell me, what you really know." Clara paused, looking into Hank's eyes. She had waited for the right moment, and it seemed that moment had arrived. "Hank, I'm not just a companion," she said softly, her voice trembling slightly. "I've trained as a doctor. I've spent years caring for the sick, studying illnesses and treating wounds. I can help more than I've let on." Hank's eyes widened, but he did not step back. Instead, he nodded slowly, a mix of respect and relief in his gaze. "Then we need you now more than ever," he said. "The town is counting on you." Clara took a deep breath. The truth was out, and with it came both freedom and responsibility. She organized the townspeople, explaining what needed to be done. Quarantines were set up for the sick, herbs and water were distributed carefully, and simple hygiene measures were introduced to slow the spread. Clara's calm authority helped ease some of the fear that had begun to take hold in Dust Creek. The work was exhausting. Clara barely slept, moving from house to house, checking fevers, cleaning wounds, and offering reassurance. Hank stayed by her side, helping wherever he could, running errands and carrying supplies. Even the children helped in small ways, fetching water or bringing clean cloths. The town had never faced anything like this, and the epidemic forced everyone to rely on one another more than ever before. Despite their best efforts, the illness continued to spread. Clara's heart ached each time a new person fell ill, and the weight of responsibility pressed heavily on her shoulders. She worked tirelessly, often ignoring her own hunger and fatigue. Yet as she treated each patient, she also noticed small victories. Tommy's fever finally breaking, Mrs. Parker resting peacefully after days of coughing, and a few older townspeople showing improvement under her care. The townspeople began to see Clara in a new light. No longer just the gentle companion or the mail-order bride, she was now a healer, a source of knowledge, and a guiding force in the town's darkest hours. Some were surprised, even skeptical at first, but the effectiveness of her care could not be denied. Gradually, trust grew, and people began to follow her instructions without hesitation. Hank watched this transformation with quiet admiration. He had always respected Clara, but now he saw her strength, intelligence, and courage in a way that left him awestruck. One evening, after a long day of tending to patients, he sat beside her on the porch, tired and covered in dust. "You've saved lives today," he said softly. "More than I can count. You've done what no one else could." Clara shook her head, exhaustion lining her face. "I'm just doing what I can," she whispered. "But it's not over yet. We have to keep going, keep helping until this is under control." The epidemic grew more severe over the following weeks. Families were confined to their homes, children too weak to play outside, and the town seemed to shrink into a place of sickness and fear. Clara's knowledge and determination became the backbone of Dust Creek's survival. She taught the townspeople how to care for the sick, how to clean and prepare food safely, and how to watch for dangerous symptoms. Each small act of care became a lifeline, and each life saved strengthened the town's hope. Even in the face of fear and exhaustion, moments of humanity and kindness emerged. Clara saw neighbors checking on one another, sharing supplies, and comforting the sick. She witnessed Hank comforting a frightened child, holding her hand while explaining that the fever would pass. The town, though strained, began to come together in ways it had never done before. Clara felt a quiet pride in their resilience. One particularly difficult night, a young mother brought her infant to Clara. The baby's skin was pale, and he struggled to breathe. Clara's heart raced as she examined him, realizing he was in critical condition. She instructed the mother on feeding and warmth, carefully monitoring the child throughout the night. As dawn broke, the infant's breathing steadied, and Clara allowed herself a small sigh of relief. Moments like these reminded her why she had chosen to keep her knowledge ready, even if it had been hidden for so long. The townspeople began to speak of Clara in hushed tones, sharing stories of her tireless work and bravery. They marveled at her skill, the way she could calm the sick, the way she organized care, and the way she remained composed even in the face of tragedy. Dust Creek had always been a town of hard-working people, but Clara's presence brought a new sense of hope and security that had been absent before. Hank noticed the subtle change in the town as well. People treated Clara with respect and gratitude, but he also saw how her presence had strengthened him. Her courage inspired him to take on more responsibility, to care for the sick with greater determination, and to stand alongside her as a partner in this fight. In quiet moments, he reached for her hand, offering comfort and support, and she responded with the trust and warmth that had begun to grow between them. The epidemic began to slow as Clara's measures took effect. Fewer new cases appeared, and the sick started to recover. The town had endured weeks of fear, exhaustion, and grief, but the worst seemed to have passed. Clara allowed herself a moment to rest, sitting on the porch with Hank and watching the sun rise over the hills. "We made it through," Hank said softly, taking her hand. "Thanks to you, you saved us all." Clara looked out at the town she had come to love, at the children playing cautiously in the streets, at neighbors checking on one another, and at the people who had begun to trust and rely on her. She felt a deep sense of relief, but also a quiet pride. Dust Creek had survived not just because of her knowledge, but because the town had come together, following her guidance and finding strength in one another. The epidemic had tested Clara in ways she had never imagined. She had revealed her true self, faced fear, and worked tirelessly to save lives. And in doing so, she had found acceptance, respect, and a bond with the town that went beyond anything she had anticipated. Dust Creek was no longer just a place to hide or begin anew. It was a community that she had helped protect, a place where her skills, courage, and compassion had made a real difference. Even as the town began to recover, Clara knew that life would never be quite the same. The epidemic had left its mark, teaching the people of Dust Creek the importance of knowledge, preparation, and community. And for Clara, it had taught her the power of trust, honesty, and the courage to reveal who she truly was. As she stood on the porch, watching the sun rise and feeling the cool morning breeze, Clara felt a sense of calm. The town had survived, and she had survived with it. Dust Creek was stronger, wiser, and more connected than before, and she had found her place at the heart of it all. The days after the epidemic began to feel lighter. Dust Creek was slowly returning to its usual rhythm, though the scars of the illness were still visible. Some families had lost loved ones, and others bore the memory of sleepless nights, caring for sick children and neighbors. But the town had endured, and Clara Reynolds had been at the center of its survival. She walked through the streets, observing the slow, steady return of life. People smiled again, though cautiously at first, and the sounds of work and laughter began to fill the air. Clara had earned the respect of every man, woman, and child in Dust Creek. No longer was she the mysterious mail-order bride with a gentle demeanor. She was now the town's healer, a woman whose knowledge had saved countless lives. People came to her willingly, not only for care but for guidance, advice, and comfort. Children ran to greet her, their faces bright, and neighbors nodded with appreciation as she passed. Clara felt a deep satisfaction in these small gestures, knowing that her efforts had not been in vain. Hank Morrison had grown closer to her than ever before. He watched her with admiration, his respect deepened by her courage and tireless work. Even in exhaustion, Clara had handled herself with calm authority, directing the townspeople, caring for the sick, and comforting the frightened. Hank found himself drawn not only to her skill, but to her kindness, her intelligence, and the quiet strength she displayed every day. One evening, as they stood together on the porch overlooking the fields, he took her hand gently in his. "You've changed this town, Clara," he said softly. "Not just with what you've done for the sick, but with the way you've brought us together. You've made Dust Creek stronger, better, and safer." Clara felt warmth spread through her chest. She squeezed his hand in return. "It was everyone together," she said. "I only helped guide them, you all did the rest." Hank smiled, but there was a seriousness in his eyes. "You've done more than guide us. You've saved lives. You've given people hope when there was none. That's something we can never forget." As the town recovered, Clara found herself becoming a natural part of its life. She helped organize the small schoolhouse, teaching the children basic hygiene and health practices and sharing lessons she had learned from her studies. She instructed families on simple ways to care for their homes and their animals, emphasizing cleanliness, proper food storage, and how to identify early signs of sickness. Dust Creek was slowly transforming, adopting practices that would help prevent future illness. The townspeople began to embrace these changes, though at first they had been hesitant. Mr. Jenkins, once wary of anything new, now praised Clara's methods, proudly explaining to neighbors how keeping clean water separate from waste had prevented another illness from spreading. Women in town replicated the herbal remedies Clara had shared, carefully measuring teas and poultices, and even teaching the children small lessons. The community had learned resilience, organization, and care, and Clara had been the quiet force guiding them. Hank noticed the way Clara had grown into her role, confident yet gentle, knowledgeable yet humble. He often watched her work, sometimes offering a helping hand, sometimes simply observing. He admired how she could handle even the most challenging moments without panic, how she inspired others without demanding it, and how she balanced compassion with authority. Each day, he felt a stronger connection to her, a bond that went beyond affection. He realized that he no longer wanted to imagine Dust Creek without Clara at its heart. One afternoon, as Clara worked with a group of children teaching them to wash their hands properly and care for their animals, Hank approached her with a small, nervous smile. "Clara, I've been meaning to tell you something," he said, his voice quiet. The children looked up curiously, sensing the seriousness in his tone. Clara paused, setting down her tools. "Yes," she asked, her voice calm but curious. Hank took a deep breath. "I've watched you through all of this. I've seen the way you care, the way you lead, the way you never give up. I admire you more than I ever thought I could. And I don't want you to be just my companion anymore. I want you to be my partner in every way." Clara felt a warmth bloom in her chest. She had feared so many things when she arrived in Dust Creek: rejection, suspicion, isolation. But Hank's words reminded her that trust and love could grow even in the most difficult circumstances. She smiled, gently taking his hand. "Hank, I've come to care for you too," she admitted. "And I trust you. I would be honored to be your partner truly in every way." The children cheered softly at their exchange, not fully understanding the words but sensing the happiness. The townspeople who had gathered nearby for errands or chores nodded quietly, smiling at the sight of the bond between the two. Clara felt a sense of belonging stronger than she had ever imagined. Dust Creek was no longer just a place she had arrived in. It was home, and she was finally accepted fully for who she truly was. As weeks passed, life in Dust Creek began to return to a normal rhythm. The streets were lively once more, children played without fear, and families rebuilt their homes and routines. Clara continued to teach and guide, but now her work was met with respect and appreciation, not secrecy or caution. The town had learned to trust her, and she had found a sense of peace in that trust. Clara also began to focus on long-term improvements for the town. She taught the townspeople how to create small infirmaries for future illnesses, how to store food safely, and how to identify early signs of dangerous diseases. She encouraged regular gatherings to share knowledge, creating a network of care that could endure long after the epidemic had passed. Dust Creek was changing, growing stronger and more resilient, and Clara felt proud of the role she had played in that transformation. Hank worked alongside her, his admiration for Clara deepening every day. Together, they repaired fences, tended animals, and managed the ranch, but they also shared quiet moments of conversation and laughter. He found joy in her presence, not only as a companion but as a partner who challenged him, inspired him, and supported him in ways he had never imagined. The bond between them grew stronger, built on trust, respect, and the shared experience of surviving a crisis together. One evening, as the sun set behind the hills, casting long shadows across the fields, Clara and Hank stood on the porch of their home, watching the town below. The streets were alive with activity, children's laughter ringing in the air, neighbors helping each other with chores and repairs. The town was thriving once more, and Clara felt a deep sense of satisfaction. "We've come a long way," Hank said softly, his arm around her shoulders. Clara nodded, feeling the weight of the past weeks lift slightly from her shoulders. "Yes, we have," she said, and it's only possible because we all work together. Dust Creek has shown me that even the smallest community can endure and grow stronger if they care for each other. Hank looked at her, his eyes filled with warmth and admiration. And you've shown me the same. You've brought hope, strength, and care, and you've become the heart of this town. I couldn't imagine Dust Creek without you. Clara felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, not of sorrow, but of gratitude. She had arrived in Dust Creek as a stranger, a woman hiding her true self, unsure of her place in this rugged land. Now she stood as a trusted healer, a teacher, a guide, and a partner, not just to Hank, but to the entire town. She had found her purpose, and she had found a home. As the months passed, Clara continued her work with renewed energy. She taught children to read and write, organized gatherings for women to share knowledge, and helped Hank improve the ranch with her insight and guidance. Dust Creek became a stronger, healthier, and more connected community, ready to face whatever challenges might come in the future. Hank and Clara's relationship grew steadily, built on trust, shared experiences, and mutual admiration. They worked side by side, laughed together, and found comfort in one another's presence. The bond that had begun with polite letters and cautious interactions had blossomed into love and partnership. One crisp morning, as the first frost dusted the hills, Clara looked out over the town and the fields beyond. She felt a deep sense of peace, knowing that she had helped guide Dust Creek through one of its darkest times and had emerged not just stronger, but more connected to the people she had grown to love. The town was alive, thriving, and full of hope, and she knew that she had earned her place in its story. Clara turned to Hank, who stood beside her watching the sunrise. "We did it," she said softly. "Yes," Hank replied, his hand finding hers. "Together." And in that quiet, golden morning, Clara realized that Dust Creek was no longer a town of strangers, and she was no longer a woman hiding her talents. She had become a part of something greater, a community bound by trust, care, and resilience. She had found love, purpose, and belonging, and the future, no matter what it held, felt brighter than ever.